You know what's creepier than finding a dead body? Finding a dead body in a church, especially when it seems like the person planned the entire thing. So, it's December 4th of 1982, inside the Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Boise, Idaho. It's just after 4 PM when a well-dressed man walks in there, heading straight for the confessional. But he stops. Someone is already in there. So, instead, he quietly takes a seat in one of the pews. Fast forward around 2 hours now to 6 PM. People start arriving for a funeral mass. Among them is Grace Leeburn, who notices something unusual. There's a man slumped over on the kneelers, completely still. Concerned, she calls over her son Leo, who just happens to be one of the church's head ushers. Leo goes over and takes one look. He then turns to signal another member of the church. He brings in Virginia Almquist, a nurse, to check on this man. The moment she touches him, it's abundantly clear what they have here. He's cold to the touch, and he has no pulse. He's dead. That man would later be known only as William L. Toomey, a name that might be fake, a body that was real, and a mystery that spans across decades, multiple states, and possibly connects to a series of priest murders that rocked the American Southwest. Hi folks, I'm Johnny, and welcome to The Oddest. Today we're diving into a cold case that bothered investigators for 40 years, a mysterious in a church that might be connected to something much, much darker. So let's start with what we actually know about this guy. William L. Toomey was a white male, probably between 35 and 45 years old. He stood around 6 feet tall and weighed around 175 pounds and had sandy, wavy blonde hair with these distinctive grey eyes that had little flecks of brown in them. He was clean shaven, he had a nice tan, and he was genuinely well put together. But his outfit, this is where things get really interesting. See, Toomey was dressed in a long-sleeved green shirt, blue jeans and cowboy boots. Around his neck was a turquoise and silver bolo tie, and on his wrist, a Seiko watch. But the real standout here was his belt buckle, this large eye-catching thing with a 100 peso coin right in the centre. Whoever this guy was, he definitely had his own style. Now that belt buckle I just mentioned, it wasn't just any old belt buckle. It was handcrafted by someone named P. White from New Mexico. But here's the strange thing about that. Nobody knows if the authorities ever tracked down this P. White guy, or even tried to contact him. Hello? I mean, it seems like a pretty obvious lead to follow, right? And that's not the only clue linking Toomey to the Southwest. His deeply tanned skin made a lot of people think that he was from that region, maybe Arizona, New Mexico, or even Texas. Then there's his wallet. When they found his wallet, it had worn spots, places where something used to be but wasn't anymore. And what's the first thing that comes to mind? Identification. Many investigators believe that at some point Toomey's ID was in that wallet, but by the time he died, it was long gone. All they did find was $1,900 in cash and a typed note that read,
"In the event of my death, the enclosed currency should give more than adequate compensation for my funeral or disposal, preferred to be cremated, expenditures. What is left over, please take this as a contribution to this church. God will see to your honesty in this. William L. Toomey."
Now, the name William L. Toomey is super interesting because there's a well-known manufacturer of clergy apparel called R.J. Toomey, based over in Worcester, Massachusetts. That was founded in 1936 by Richard J. Toomey. The company was officially incorporated in 1946 with his two brothers, John and Lawrence. By 1973, John and Richard had sold their shares in the company, leaving Lawrence in charge until he died in 1976. His daughters then took over after that, but things got messy. Then in 1988, there was this whole massive legal battle between Lawrence's daughters and Richard Toomey Jr., who was using the Toomey name for his own clergy clothing company. So the whole reason I'm telling you that part is there Mystery Man's name choice just a pure coincidence? Or was there some deeper connection to this company that made literal priest clothes? It's a detail it feels too specific to ignore. Dr. Erwin Sonnenberg, the medical examiner who performed Toomey's autopsy, well, he came to a grim conclusion. This was definitely by his own hand. Toomey had ingested a small amount of cyanide, which killed him pretty quickly. So just 2 days later, on December 6, 1982, a funeral was held for him at Sacred Heart Catholic Church. Despite no one knowing who he actually was, around 200 people showed up to mourn the stranger's death. His grey casket, decorated with flowers, sat at the front as Reverend Thomas Foucher led the service. Get this, the funeral wasn't just for Toomey. It was dedicated to all those who had died in despair during the holiday season. That's pretty powerful stuff if you ask me. A tribute to lives lost in darkness, including a man whose true identity remains a mystery to this very day. Foucher, the priest, had said something really poignant during the service.
He came to us to die. We don't know who he is, but we come here in faith to pray for him, whoever he may be, and to pray for ourselves.
Interestingly, the money that was meant to be for Toomey's service was kept by investigators, so it was never actually donated to the church. Between the alias on the note and the missing ID from his wallet, one thing seems pretty clear. This man did not want to be identified. Why? Well, that's anyone's guess. Investigators followed leads across Pennsylvania, New York, Tennessee, Oklahoma and Illinois, but many still believe his real roots were somewhere in the southwest, maybe California, Arizona or New Mexico. Who was this guy and what was he running from? That remains one of the biggest questions in this case. What could Toomey have done that would drive him to make this decision? Well, that's where our story takes a much darker turn. So around the time of Toomey's death, there was a series of priests being murdered or going missing in the southwest United States. And there's a theory that Toomey may have been involved somehow. Let me walk you through these cases because it's absolutely wild. December 21st of 1981, about a year before Toomey's death, Father Patrick Ryan checks into the Sand and Sage Motel in Odessa, Texas. But something's off. He uses a fake name. He gives a false license plate number, and less than 24 hours later, he's dead. A maid expecting to clean room 126 instead finds a nightmare. Blood dried on the walls, seeping around holes punched into them. The air conditioning unit was ripped off the wall. The bed frame was split. Furniture was overturned. Clothes, beer cans, cigarette butts were just scattered everywhere. The phone was torn out of the wall and the TV was smashed. And then, right inside the door, she sees him, Father Ryan, lying face down. He's naked and his arms are tied behind his back with a sock. He had been beaten to death, and from the state of the room, it's clear that he fought like hell. Strangely, a guest checked in around 9 PM, just a few doors down, and heard nothing. That puts the estimated time of death anywhere between 8 and 9 PM. But I mean, who killed Father Ryan? And why was he using a fake name? That's where things just get even more bizarre. So the day before his murder, Father Ryan picked up a hitchhiker, a 25-year-old man called James Reyes. This wasn't really unusual for him. He was a good guy and he often picked up hitchhikers on the road. This was because he often made the drive between his parish in Denver City, Texas and Hobbs, New Mexico, and he would stop and give rides to people that needed them along the way. But this ride took a dark turn. Father Ryan seemed especially interested in Reyes' childhood on an Apache reservation. He used that as a way to lure him to the motel, inviting him inside. Once there, the drinks started flowing. First beer, then vodka, and then, well, things escalated. What happened next was not consensual. Reyes became a victim of assault, and within 24 hours, Father Ryan was dead. Reyes was in shock. He was confused, ashamed, and scared. He later described the moment that he left the motel, saying,
"I didn't even grab my stuff. I was walking down the street thinking, that didn't happen. That couldn't happen, not with Father Ryan."
Reyes was an open gay man still coming to terms with his identity, and what happened that night was deeply traumatic. But what he went through would have been horrifying for anyone. Still reeling from this experience, he left the area entirely, heading for New Mexico. Along the way, he picked up a receipt and even got a speeding ticket, both time-stamped, both placing him miles away from Odessa when Father Ryan was killed. Here's where things take a wild turn. On November 18th, 1982, which was just a couple of weeks before Toomey's, Reyes, who'd been struggling with alcoholism, well, he walked into the Albuquerque Police Department and confessed to murdering Father Ryan. But here's the thing. When he confessed, he was clearly drunk out of his mind. The smell of alcohol on him was overwhelming, so say the cops. Despite his apparent alibi with the speeding ticket and the receipt, the confession was taken seriously. Rios was convicted and sentenced to 38 years in prison for a crime that most people, including many involved in this case, firmly believe that he did not commit. He ended up serving 20 years before being released. So if Rios didn't kill Father Ryan, then who did? Let's move on now to Father Benjamin Carrier, or Father Ben as many knew him. He was a respected priest from Our Lady of Light Church in San Diego in California, known for helping out the homeless. On November 10th of 1982, which was less than a month now before Toomey's, Father Carrier's body was discovered at the El Rancho Motel in Yuma, Arizona. Just like Father Ryan, he had been asphyxiated, bound with a sock. He was found face down and naked. The similarities between these two cases are pretty chilling. The day before his body was found, Father Carrier had been seen with two white men at the motel pool. He had also paid for two people to stay the night, and his car was stolen, and then later recovered all the way across in Las Vegas, Nevada. Next up on the list is Father Rinaldo Rivera, who served at the Cathedral Basilica of St. Francis in Santa Fe, New Mexico. On the evening of August 5th, 1982, just 4 months prior to Toomey's death, the rectory received a call from a man claiming to be Michael Carmelo. The man said his grandfather needed last rites at a rest stop near Waldo, and Father Rivera agreed to go there. He was told that this man would be waiting in a blue pickup truck. Rivera left around 8:45 p.m, but he never returned. 2 days later, Father Rivera's body was found in a remote field near the Waldo exit on Interstate 20. He had been shot once in the stomach and strangled with a wire or possibly a coat hanger. His 1974 Chevy Malibu was discovered abandoned 110 miles away at a rest stop. Fingerprints that likely belonged to the killer were found on the car. The gas tank was empty, suggesting that the car was stolen and then driven until it simply ran out of fuel, and Father Rivera's last rites kit, well, that was never found. The FBI created a psychological profile of this offender, suggesting the motive was likely revenge. But despite all this, only 2 suspects ever surfaced in this case, and neither of them panned out. Our last one on the list is Father John Kerrigan. He had just settled into Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Ronan, Montana on July 18th, 1984, which was now about a year and a half after Toomey's death. But only 2 days later, he disappeared without a trace. Father Kerrigan was last seen leaving a bakery in Ronan on July 20th. Days later, bloody clothing was found along Montana Highway 35 near Flathead Lake, which is about 5 miles from Ronan, along with a bloody coat hanger. The next day, Father Kerrigan's car, a brown Chevy Malibu, was found abandoned several miles away. Inside the trunk, police discovered his wallet containing $1,200 in cash, along with a blood-stained shovel and a pillowcase. Despite all these findings, Father Kerrigan's body was never actually found. Now listen, I'll be the first one to admit, these crimes don't seem to be directly connected at first glance, but there are some eerie similarities. Both Father Ryan and Father Carrier were bound with socks. Father Rivera, Father Carrier and Father Kerrigan, well, they all had their cars stolen and then abandoned miles away. And let's not forget the timing of all this. Father Ryan's murder, December 1981, Father Rivera's in August of 1982, Father Carrier's in November of 1982, and Toomey's own death in December of 1982. So, I mean, what does all this have to do with William L. Toomey? Well, his name keeps popping up in connection with several of these cases. Some investigators believe that he might be a suspect in the deaths of these priests, and that this theory could help explain why Toomey then subsequently took his own life, especially in a church. Perhaps he knew something that he just couldn't live with. It might also explain why he was trying to go to the confessional that day that he died. Was he maybe seeking some sort of redemption? Or was he trying to make peace with something far darker? There's also the possibility that Toomey wasn't the actual killer of these priests, but was somehow involved, especially since Father Kerrigan disappeared after Toomey had already died. It's possible that the guilt of being tied to multiple deaths could have driven him to take his own life. But here's the bigger question. How is all of this connected? When I started thinking about it, a darker possibility sprung to mind. The long hidden horror within the Catholic Church. I'm not going to say it on YouTube, but you know what I'm talking about, right? So I decided to dig a wee bit deeper, and let me tell you something, I found something really disturbing in the records related to these events. YouTube's going to ban my channel. So let's start with Thomas Foucher, the priest at Sacred Heart Catholic Church. This is the one where Toomey actually took his own life. In 2018, decades after all this happened, Foucher was arrested for having over 2,200 indecent images. And these weren't just any images, they were reportedly some of the most disturbing that the investigators had ever seen. According to multiple sources, he died in prison in 2020. So now, let's talk about Father John Kerrigan, whose body was never found. Well, it turns out that Kerrigan was also a predator. In fact, he had been sent away to New Mexico, which was a place that he was supposed to be, it's like a treatment facility for drug and alcohol addiction or other types of addiction. It's called something like the Congregation of the Servant of the Paraclete, and it's in Jemez, New Mexico. But it became known as a reformatory for priests who had, well, you know. Kerrigan never faced justice for his crimes. His name was eventually released on a list of clergy implicated in that type of stuff by the Diocese of Helena in 2015, and over the span of 30 years, Kerrigan had been assigned to 13 different parishes. 13. How many victims could he have had access to? I found a Father Patrick Ryan listed on multiple online databases of priests accused of this type of stuff, but there wasn't enough information to confirm if it's the same Father Patrick Ryan who was murdered. Still, considering all this, you know, his history with James Rios and the fact that he regularly picked up people on that road, well, it's likely that these assaults were part of regular behaviour. Now, there's no direct accusations against Father Rivera or Father Carrier, but both these men worked in the same diocese, which had 71 accusations of that type during the time that they were there. For any victims by the priest's hand, well, they might see all of these men in the same light, as abusers, or at the very least, enablers. Could they all be linked by this pattern of abuse? It's a possibility, though, that we can't really ignore. So what does all of this mean? Could these murders, or at least some of them, have been an act of revenge from an adult now who had suffered this as a child? So let's circle back now to the original. Let's circle back to William L. Toomey. Could he have been one of these victims by one of these priests? And did he take the ultimate revenge? If Toomey was one of these victims, it could have led to some serious trauma. I mean, depression, PTSD, maybe even pushing him to take his own life. Did Toomey choose Sacred Heart Catholic Church because he knew fine well that Thomas Foucher was there? Was Toomey maybe another priest who was aware of the terrible things that his colleagues were involved in? There's always a chance that Toomey was somehow involved in these disappearances or deaths. There's also the possibility that he was just a depressed man who chose to end it that way in a church. I had a glance through some missing persons reports in the National Unidentified and Missing Persons System, but unfortunately I couldn't find anything that accurately matched William L. Toomey. This might just be another case of an adult who either lost contact or who chose to leave their family without any form of explanation. And since he was an adult, well, he had the right to disappear if he wanted to. As for the investigation itself, fingerprints are available in the case, but it's unclear whether DNA or dental records are on file, so we may never find an actual answer. Nearly 40 years have passed since a nameless man chose Sacred Heart Church as the place to end his own life, and still his true identity remains unknown. As fingerprints wait in databases somewhere, his story incomplete. Was William L. Toomey a killer seeking absolution before death, a victim of abuse, unable to live with the trauma, or just simply a troubled soul with no connection to these priest murders at all? Perhaps what's most disturbing isn't just the mystery of who this man was, but what his death represents. A time when secrets stayed buried, when institutions protected themselves rather than the vulnerable, and when some felt their only resource against injustice was to take matters into their own hands. The answers may be lost to time, but the questions still remain. They force us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, about justice, and what people do when the systems that are meant to protect them fail. Sometimes the deepest mysteries aren't just about who did what, but why. What drives someone to violence? What pushes them to then take their own life? And what connections lie hidden beneath the surface? If this William L. Toomey was involved in these priest deaths, Was he a monster? Or was he someone fighting the monsters in the only way that he felt he could? And if he was just a troubled man who wanted to die in a church, what led him to that final desperate act? We may never know the truth for sure, but by asking these questions, maybe we keep alive the possibility that someday someone will come forward with the missing piece that solves the decades-old puzzle. Right, thanks for taking the time to hang out with me today. I really appreciate every view, every like, every subscriber. Please stay safe out there, folks. Tell someone that you love them. And above all else, remember, keep smiling.